Chapter 228 of Kengan Omega has kicked off the fight between Hatsumi and Kaneda. I don't even know if you pronounce the name like the country Canada, but it's far more memorable than Suikichi, so I'm going to move on with that. But this chapter also talks about the new faction that has been introduced in the series called the Death Dealers. Now, most of us probably know who the Death Dealers are. These are who used to be the Worm, which is something I'll start off with because we do know that the Worm terrorist group is now under fire and is pretty much crumbling everywhere in the world right now. This is something that was hinted by Jan, and I did make a video about the true nature of the worms, which I do recommend you watch that video. I think it holds up pretty well, even though I might change my conclusion on what the worm has done so far. However, in summary, they did run an undercover operation that was basically spearheaded by Jan. The reason, however, might end up being a lot more simple and not as interesting as I hinted at in the video, where I thought they had a noble cause, mainly because of the type of unity the worm has. However, I do want to somewhat simplify my conclusion on that, and I think they might have the noble cause in that the connector, and basically the relationship they have with the connector, to where they'll basically follow his orders and see him as this guiding light in their organization basically. But this also might hint at the fact, especially seeing that Death Dealers are going to the Kengan Association right now for business, that maybe this was the goal the entire time, for them to actually become a bigger business. This might seem less, like you could say, noble, but it is far more grounded in terms of how we see the world of Kengan, where at the end of the day this might come down to profit, since right now the Death Dealers are benefiting the most from this situation. Even though they were ex-Worm members, they kind of, you could say, manufactured the perfect enemies for them to defeat, and by doing so they were able to create so much more business for themselves around the world, making them more money, which has now led them to the Kengan Association. So if you're looking at the pattern right now, it seems as though this just leads to them becoming a bigger and bigger company basically. However, it seems as though we'll be getting the second connector reveal after this fight, because we did see him in the last chapter between Mokaku versus Shen, the last chapter where the revelation was that they are at minimum like 2 connectors. So we'll be seeing the second connector fairly soon, it seems. And I wonder if they'll be able to recognize the second connector. If it's even him, it could turn out to just be Jan, as maybe he sends someone else to act as the leader of Death Dealers. But it would be pretty exciting if the second connector himself were to go there. Now, I know some people have a few theories about him. I don't even know what to think about the second connector, to be honest. He seems like he's basically in line with what Shen and everyone else is doing. Whether or not he's as powerful as Shen is probably the bigger question. But the fact that by the end of Mokaku versus Shen's fight, Shen was specifically called the strongest, unless they share that title somehow, then it's more than likely the case that the second connector is probably not as strong as Shen, if they're even a combatant at all. But if he is strong, then he's probably just as strong as Shen and probably shares the same title as Shen as well, which would be pretty interesting to see how that turns out, having 2 people that are just so much more stronger than the rest of the verse. Because keep in mind, Shen is so much more stronger than every other character in the series, it's not even funny. So to have someone else who's on that level is gonna be fairly interesting as well, because like, if these people turn out to be enemies, it's gonna be a pretty hard sell to defeat both of them. But moving on from the death dealers and the second connector and all that stuff, we'll go to, of course, the actual fight itself, which is Hatsumi versus Kaneda. That still messes me up a bit. But the fight has basically started between Hatsumi, and a lot of people are betting on Hatsumi, right? I did a poll, and last I looked at it, a lot of people are just expecting Hatsumi to straight up win. However, in this fight, it's revealed that now he's with the top tiers now. He can now basically sense the inception of intent and can move before his opponent moves. What this suggests, however, is that Hatsumi couldn't really do that, which means that, of course, I might have to do a video on the inception of the intent, even though I've done a video on why foresight is actually broken. But to put it quite simply, it seems as though what Hatsumi was doing at the very beginning was purely reaction time and knowledge of what his opponent's gonna do based on how they move, which is not necessarily pre-initiative. If we remember, the display of pre-initiative is, think of when Kuroki had that guy with a gun right in front of him, and he had his face and his entire body covered up, and so Kuroki couldn't use any physical signs on the person. He couldn't see the person pull the trigger or any of that stuff to be able to sense the inception of intent. It seems like something that's a lot more instinctual than anything else. So it seems as though Hatsumi is around that level now where he could probably deal with people like Kano, people like Ryan, people like Kuroki a lot better now since he has this, because I think this is a huge buff for Hatsumi. And to keep it honest, this might mean that, because it's a bit conflicting, right? Because that would mean that Kaneda would win normally, right, before this, because he does have a trick to counter what is essentially the inception of intent by basically determining what the person who has the inception of intent as a skill set, by determining how they react, basically. So he basically tries to control how they will move so that he will counter it, basically. And it's fairly complicated, and it would be nice to see firsthand how Kaneda will make this work against Hatsumi, and whether or not it'll be enough to beat someone who has the inception of intent. But the problem here is that might not be the only barrier Kaneda has to break down with Hatsumi. Because keep in mind, there's also the fact that Hatsumi just seems like the far more powerful fighter. It's just a question of if he still has the inconsistency problem. And the inconsistency problem is really the thing that's on my mind the most. Has he dealt with that? Can he fight at his best when he chooses, and he doesn't need an entire warm-up session just to get to the position he wants to be in? Hopefully the Kure training helped with that, but I still have questions, and hopefully we'll see in this fight itself. But yeah, that's basically the chapter. A lot of stuff that I basically discussed, even though the chapter was fairly simple if you think about it. But it seems as though, especially after this fight, right? I'm hyped for the fight, but especially after this fight, seeing the death dealers, because I do think my theory about the death dealers joining the Real Champions tournament is going to happen. So now I'm just more certain of that now. And whoever they pick to fight is going to be absolutely insane. Because they're probably not going to pick Shen if they have one representative. It might be the last Nico, it might be Yan, might be even Lohan. I think Lohan might be the best option because we just haven't seen him yet. And he doesn't have nearly as much of hype as for example, Yan, the last Nico, and Gilbert Wu. He just doesn't have that hype because we've never seen him. So yeah, that's that really. Thanks for watching the video if you've made it this far, and like, sub, all that fun stuff, and yeah, take it easy.